Welcome to the Smart College Buyer Podcast. My mission is to help high school families pay for college without taking on a truckload of debt. Each episode, I'll share insights into college admissions, financial aid, payment strategies, and more, often with expert guests. I'm Jack Wang, your host. I started helping families after struggling to navigate the process myself for my sons. If I needed help, I knew others did too. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, my name is Jack Wang and welcome to this episode of the Smart College Buyer Podcast. Glad to have you with me here. And the picture behind me is of the Magic Center at the Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. It's an absolutely gorgeous, state-of-the-art building that houses full video production and arts design facilities. I'm not even sure what the right terms are, but it was absolutely gorgeous. And the work that is displayed in there and done by students is just absolutely incredible. There's a TV studio, podcast studio, all sorts of resources for students who engage in that kind of activity or major in related majors. But I want to use this picture as the backdrop of what we're going to talk about today. And that is a question that is commonly asked by parents, which is a fair question, but I don't think most parents, judging by the shocked look on their faces and the questions I get in social media forums, but I don't think that it's a question that parents really know the answer to. And it's very, very simple. And that is, how does aid work? Okay, that's a fair question, right? Because we all want more aid for our students, right? So they have more money for college, so college costs less and it has less impact on our finances and stuff. And so one of the mistakes that people think is that there's merit aid and there's financial aid. And I often talk about this in these terms, okay? So I guess I contribute a little bit to that problem. But the reality is that merit and financial aid, most people think that there's a wall in between them, right? And the two are completely separate. That's actually not true. So let's take a look at first sort of where aid comes from. According to research done by the College Board using federal government data and then their own survey data, if you look at raw numbers, the vast majority of aid for college comes from the federal government. But the vast majority of that number is actually student loans or different loans, right? Whether it's loans to the student, either at the undergraduate level, the graduate level, or to parents in the form of Parent Plus loans. So most of it's in loans. And now loans aren't necessarily bad. They're a tool, but I like aid that you don't have to pay back, right? You don't have to pay interest on, you don't have to pay back. What we refer to that as is what's called gift aid. And so gift aid is typically scholarships, right? So scholarships grant, whether it's from the college, from the federal government, from a state, or from an external source, such as like a chamber of commerce or a company or whatever. And so if you look at gift aid, the vast majority of gift aid comes from the colleges themselves. Very little come by way of what are called external scholarships, right? So again, where you fill out a separate application to the local chamber of commerce, or perhaps employers have like scholarships for the children of employees and things like that. Yes, those do exist, and those are things you should try and go for, but comparatively, they're relatively small dollars. There's also state aid programs. So I'm based in Massachusetts. So here in Massachusetts, we have things like the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship, which is actually a tuition scholarship for in-state colleges and universities if you meet certain academic requirements. I know in the state of Florida, there is the Bright Future Scholarship, and other states have similar type of programs. But now, while those are great if you qualify for them, but in the overall scheme of things, they're actually relatively few dollars as compared to other things. At the federal level, some grant programs would be things like the Pell Grant, which is for low-income families, the CEOG grant, which is the Supplemental Educational Opportunities Grant. That is for very low-income families. There's also the Teach Grant for families going, for students going to teaching, and similar things like that. And obviously, there's things like VA benefits and things. And while those are great, but again, you have to meet the criteria. And at the federal level, it is often, for most of those programs, it is often if you're low income. Right? Obviously, with the exception of Teach Grant, that's really based more on major. And with the VA, you have to be a veteran, right? Active duty or a veteran to get like GI Bill benefits, things like that. But again, the majority of gift aid comes from the colleges themselves. And so what that means is because it's the college's own money, they get to set the rules on how that money is dispersed. And so that's what I want to kind of go back to what I was starting to say earlier, which is a lot of people think there's merit aid and there's financial aid, right? Financial need-based aid. But in reality, because the vast majority of gift aid is from the colleges themselves and colleges get to set the rules, what you actually figure out if you really dig into it is that the merit and the financial need-based, that's a very gray and fuzzy line in between those two. There are certainly merit scholarships that have a need-based component. There are need-based grants that have a merit component. There's some schools that even require the FAFSA in order to qualify for a merit scholarship. And when I tell that to parents, they're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense because the FAFSA is all about financial aid, but we're going for a merit scholarship. And I tell them, yes, that's true, but in reality, again, it's a very fuzzy line and schools can make up whatever rules that they want. So a lot of parents, when they ask me about how aid really works, they're thinking about like, is there a secret code they can put on the FAFSA or the CSS profile or something, do something weird to, blink and be able to get more aid. Or they're thinking about strictly in terms of merit, like, well, it must be, you have to have really good grades or really good test scores in order to qualify for a scholarship. And yeah, test scores and grades certainly do matter, but again, it's different. And so just looking at scores themselves, right? Like in my work of visiting colleges all around the country, I can tell you I've heard or seen so many variations of how schools treat that with regard to scholarships. Now, I'm not going to out any schools, but I'm going to just give you some examples. So right now, according to the organization called Fair Test or fairtest.org, right? They're the organization that really advocates for being colleges being test optional or test free or test blind, if you will, so that like SAT and ACT scores don't matter in the admissions process. So according to Fair Test, there's roughly about 2,000 colleges that are what's called test optional or test blind, meaning you do not have to submit a test score, SAT or ACT, in order to get in. But according to research done by the ACT organization a couple years ago, over 80% of all colleges in the US still use test scores to determine scholarships. So just some examples, at some schools, if you do not submit a test score, your kid can get in and still get considered for a scholarship, right? So that's good, okay? But that's at some schools. Other schools, like one school in particular I'm aware of, no test score, your kid can get in, but you're automatically out of consideration for the biggest scholarship. You might still get some of the smaller ones, but you're not going to get the biggest one because you didn't submit a test score. Another school, private school, you do not have to submit a test score to get in, but if there's no test score, there's no scholarships at all whatsoever, unless you arrange to interview with admissions. And then there's another school still where, no test score, you can get in, you can get all the scholarships, but if you don't submit a test score, every scholarship that you might otherwise qualify for is $5,000 less per year than if you did submit a test score, right? So there's all these different variations, and so most families don't bother asking the questions because, quite frankly, why would they, right? They don't do this full time. They would never know. And yeah, you go on the handful of college tours and you listen to what the colleges say and whatever, but they don't, most colleges are not going to tell you this unless you specifically ask. So test scores can matter. Sometimes it doesn't matter, right? Or somewhere in between. And so as part of the college search process, this is something you may have to consider. So while families are thinking about like, hey, can my kid get in? Can my kid get in? They're often not thinking about what the monetary or the aid impact is. Okay, so those are just some examples. Other examples I'm going to get to later, But schools have tremendous leeway in terms of how they apply their financial aid formula. So just because the formula says one thing, yeah, they have to basically follow the formula, but what they do with the information can be very, very different. And so now that you know that the majority of money comes from the schools itself and the schools get to set their own rules, well, then sort of how's that translate, right? Like I talked a little bit about test scores already, but how does that translate otherwise? Well, colleges, and this is both private as well as public, colleges are businesses. They might be public colleges, right? Like University of blah, 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 or a state university of blah, blah, blah. Or they could be private and private nonprofits. But make no mistake, colleges are businesses. And so while all businesses want customers, right, they don't necessarily want everybody who walks in the door. After all, if you're a business owner, you don't want a customer who can't pay. So that doesn't make any sense. And when I say can't pay, that I just mean that in the business sense. Like, obviously, if you're very low income, at most colleges have, financial aid programs to try and help you out. But my point is that colleges don't just want students. They want particular types of students. And so what does that actually mean at a college? Well, the best way to think about it, believe it or not, the analogy that fits this almost to a perfect T is the NFL draft or the professional football draft. Now, if you're not familiar with how the NFL draft works, or you just don't follow football, basically the draft is every professional football team, they get to take turns picking players out of college, right, for their team. So the first team gets the pick, and the second team then goes, third team, on and on and on. And they do it for 7 rounds. So everybody essentially gets 7 turns. It's a little bit more complicated than that because you can have some trading and you get what's called compensatory picks and stuff like that. But at the most basic level, every professional football team takes a turn. They pick a player from college with their turn, and there you go, right? And they do it 7 times. Well, if you think about the NFL draft, players are viewed differently by each team, right? Some teams might view this player as a first-round draft pick, and but another team might view that same player as a third-round draft pick, depending on what they need. But also in the NFL draft, a first-round player, right, the person who's picked first out of everybody, or near first, right, near the top, they end up with a far bigger contract than a player who's picked in the 7th round. In fact, the very last player picked in the NFL draft, which is a tremendous achievement, okay? But the very last player picked, there's a joke. His name is nicknamed Mr. Irrelevant because he was picked dead last. It is still a tremendous achievement because, after all, not everybody can say that they were drafted into the NFL, right? There's a lot of players in college who would like to go professional, but only a small fraction of them are drafted into the NFL. So even Mr. Relevant can hold his head up high and say, hey, at least I got drafted in the NFL, which the vast majority of college football players cannot say. But of course, that first round draft pick is going to get way more money in their contract and signing bonus or whatever than the 7th round draft pick. Well, what does this have to do with college and college admissions and college financial aid? Well, what it does is that colleges literally looks at your students the same way. Now, colleges may tell you, okay, they read each individual application, and they generally do, right? But because colleges are looking for particular types of students, they essentially look at your student and compare your student to every other student. Now, it could be for the entire college or university, or it could just be within the major. That's what we call admit by major, right? So they might compare engineering students to engineering students and not compare engineering students to like a philosophy student, right? But every college is basically looking at your student, trying to figure out if your student is a 1st round draft pick at that college or a 7th round draft pick at that college. And the money changes accordingly. Okay, so after all, at the NFL draft, you compare quarterbacks to quarterbacks. You don't compare a quarterback to a wide receiver because wide receiver is going to run much faster, and they but they're not going to be able to throw as well. And you don't compare them to a big, like 350-pound defensive lineman, because those guys run very fast for guys that size, but compared to wide receivers, they're dog slow. All right. So, you're getting compared against other students, right? Your student is getting compared against other students. But also, if you are a professional football team and you need a quarterback, you draft a quarterback. But if you don't need a quarterback, then you typically don't draft one, or you don't draft one very early because you may already have a really good one. That's okay, right? But again, that impacts money depending on where the players are drafted. Well, in the college world, that position equivalent, right, like the NFL draft, it could be in the college world, it could be the major that your kid is going into. It could be whether they're a boy or a girl. It could be where they're from geographically, like are they from New England, or are they from Texas, or from California, or wherever. And until recently, it could also really be based on ethnicity. And so depending on what the college is trying to do, they might favor certain characteristics over another. And so here's one of the most important things to realize about this process. The more a student helps the college achieve the college's goals, whatever that may be, whatever those may be, the more aid your student is going to get, just as sort of a general rule. So, for example, at Rochester Institute of Technology, it's roughly 70% male to 30% female. And of course, it's a STEM school, right? It's an institute of technology. So what do kids go there for, right? Technology and engineering stuff. But RIT also has great business programs and whatever. So, I'm not going to sort of give away any RIT secrets, but if you were a male student that wants to study computer science at RIT, that's already the biggest major. And it's a great program, and RIT is a great school, right? So if that's what you want, you should go. But because it's already the largest major, or one of the largest majors, they already get a lot of applications for those, right? They already get a lot of applications from male students who want to study computer science. So there's not a lot of extra incentive for RIT to give extra money to a particular kid when they already have a lot of that kid, right? And I'm speaking very high level. There's always little exceptions and different things that colleges look for, but I'm speaking at a high level. There's not a lot of incentive to go there. You find the similarity with cars. Like sometimes I often share, use the analogy of cars. Well, a lot of people like and want Ferraris, but when was the last time you saw Ferrari do a manufacturer's rebate? Right? Like never, because so many people want those cars, okay? But yet, if you take a look at like a Chevy, a Ford, a Chrysler, Jeep, Honda, Toyota, whatever, there's manufacturer's rebates a lot more often. And for certain models, and the manufacturer's not just saying, hey, I'll give you a $3,000 rebate because I just feel like it. It's because they're trying to sell that particular model, right? They're trying to get more people because maybe it's just not selling as much as they wanted to. So depending on how much your student helps the college meet its goals, the more aid you're going to get. Right. This is why sometimes families, will come to me and say, hey, but my neighbor's kid who lives across the street, we have similar financial circumstances. My kid and their kid have similar grades, similar test scores, but how come their kid got so much more scholarship money than my kid? Right. And they applied to the same college. Well, it could be because of one of these factors. The other thing is just how competitive the landscape is. Years ago, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, NACAC, which is the association for like guidance counselors, college admissions people, and independent counselors, they did a survey looking at where college applications go, right? Like from high school students. And what they found pre-COVID was that roughly about 80% of all high school applications went to like the top 10% of the schools. All right. So that would be like Ivy League, near Ivy League, public Ivies, things like that. The names that no matter where you're from, you would know the name of that college. But that meant that the other 80, 90-ish% of colleges were fighting over the remaining 20% of applications. Well, during COVID, when everything became test optional because nobody could go anywhere and whatever, it really exacerbated that effect. So today it's really more like a 90-10 split. So if you look at like the top tier schools, right, the Ivy Leagues, the near Ivies, the public Ivies, they get so many applications for every single spot that, and I'm sorry to say it this way, but it's essentially true, they don't need you. And certainly if you need a lot of aid to be able to afford to go there, and if you don't have, if you don't check one of the other boxes that the college is interested in, they don't need you. So using the 2022-2023 data, I believe it was from that year, if you look at Caltech, right, great engineering school, California, for every student they enrolled that year, they had 39 applications. Now, again, not everybody got in. And even if they got in, not everybody went. Okay, so I'm not saying that they accepted all 39. But for every kid that they enrolled, there were 38 others to choose from. And so when you have that kind of dynamic, there's not a lot of incentive on the school's part to give a lot of aid. Yet kids love it, especially for engineering kids, right? Because that's why they apply to Caltech and MIT and all that stuff, right? Columbia University, which is an Ivy League in New York, they had 37 applications per seat. Northeastern had 35. But yet at the opposite end of the spectrum, there are small, great, but small private schools around the country that get maybe 3, 4, 5 applications per seat. But now the 3 schools I named that get a lot of applications per seat, they don't give out a lot of aid. Now, they'll tell you that they're generous with aid. Maybe they meet 100% of demonstrated need or whatever, but very few of them, if any, give out merit scholarships, right? And if you are low income enough to qualify for need-based aid, then yes, they will give that to you, but otherwise they really won't give you anything, which is also why at a lot of these schools, a large proportion of the student body pays full sticker price because the parents and the students are really, yeah, they might be wealthy, but you're also paying for the prestige. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, where you're only having a handful of applications per seat enrolled, most of those schools give out lots of merit scholarships, need-based aid, and very few, if any, students pay full sticker price. And so because of this effect, this is what makes one school a little bit more generous than the other, right? All of these factors kind of combine together for the school to determine how much money they will or should give a student. Now, there's other factors, we'll talk about that, but this is how aid works at a very high level. So what that means, right, is I often get parents say, hey, my kid got accepted at blah, blah, blah Ivy League or near Ivy League school, but we didn't get any aid. What can we do, or what can we ask the school about to try and get them to give us more aid, or to get them to give us any aid, quite frankly? Yes, you can always appeal, right? But schools can always say no. But I tell these families, look, I'm gonna give you the truth. You really don't have a lot of leverage here. You really don't, right? There's very little incentive for that college to give you aid. And oh, by the way, if a college accepts your student with no scholarship, no financial aid, whatever, that tells you how that college views your student. And so as parents going through this process, they often focus on, where can my kid get accepted? But when it comes to money, you can tell how much the college wanted your kid, not just accepted your kid, wanted your kid. And so what I said earlier is the more a student helps the college meet its needs, the more aid you generally get. That's true, right? So what you're looking for is the college that really loves your kid. I did not say accept your kid, right? Because colleges will accept your kid. But the college that really loves and wants your kid. But unfortunately, through this process, most families focus on the colleges that the kid loves. Now, I probably should have led with this, but every time this comes up, I think of this great scene in the movie, The Wedding Singer. It's Adam Sandler, Drew Barrymore, among others. And there's the scene where Adam Sandler's character, he's the wedding singer. He goes to this wedding and he's all depressed because his girlfriend just broke up with him. And he sings the song, Love Stinks by Jay Giles Band, right? And the song goes like, he loves her, but she loves him, but that guy loves somebody else, whatever. That's literally kind of how colleges are, right? Like students love this college, but the college really loves this other student because this other student helps the colleges meet their goal. But then that student really loves some other college, right? It's funny. It's a great scene and leads to like a huge fight in the wedding reception. It's really funny. It's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, great music also. But it's kind of like that. So you're not looking for the college that your kid loves. Obviously, you want your kid to go to a school where they can enjoy, do well, and things like that. But don't get fixated on the name, right? Just because it's an Ivy League school does not make it the right school for your kid. All right? Yeah, I'm not taking away anything from Ivy Leagues or non-Ivy Leagues. Every student has to find their place. But you don't want to look for the college your kid loves. You want to look for the college that loves your kid. Now, as we wrap up here, one of the questions that I then get is, well, but Jack, how do you know what colleges actually want? And I will tell you that it is far more art than science, because they don't always tell me. But what I can tell you is that if your kid's going into a major like computer science, right, and the college is ranked really high for it, and that major at that particular college is already the largest major, that's not going to be the case where they want your kid, right? Because if it's already the largest major, they already have a lot of applications. But at the same time, it's not necessarily the smallest major either. Sometimes you can tell by whether the college has built a new building, right? So there was a college in Northeast that spent, I don't know, something like $10 million, $15 million for a new state-of-the-art health sciences center. And the college really wasn't known for those majors. It was actually a liberal arts college. Well, if you're going to drop like $10 million on a new building, you're not doing it because you're bored. You're going to do it and you're going to expect to fill that building with students, right? So that's an indicator also. So there's a lot of these things that's hard. It is hard to tell. But the point is very few people even ask the question. And even when they ask a similar question, they're really focused like, well, do you need like 3 years of a foreign language or 4 years of a foreign language, right? Like, I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about these bigger picture institutional priorities that can really lead to a lot more aid for your kid, all other things being equal. This is how aid really works. This is the real game, quote unquote, of financial aid. And once you understand this and can apply these principles, that will then help you become a smart college buyer. I hope this was helpful today. Hope you got a lot out of it. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Smart College Buyer podcast. I hope you found something useful for your family's journey. Follow me on social media for more episodes, videos, and tips. The links are in the show notes below. Remember, you can spend time now to plan and strategize, or you can spend more money later. Success in college admissions and financial aid isn't about luck. It's about being intentional. And I'm here to help you every step of the way.